Reno, Nevada, 1982. A 6-year-old girl vanishes from a crowded grocery store in seconds. For 43 years, her family searches desperately. Police find nothing, the case goes cold. Then in 2025, a genealogy DNA test reveals an impossible truth. Quincey Allerton is alive, living under a different name in Colorado, with no memory of the family that never stopped looking for her. How did 4 decades of lies finally unravel through modern science? Stay with us as we uncover this extraordinary story of loss, survival, and reunion. Hello and welcome to the DNA Archives, where we dive deep into cold cases, missing persons, and the mysteries that DNA finally solves. If you love stories where families are reunited after decades and truth prevails against impossible odds, you're in the right place. Please hit the like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe so you never miss a case. Now let's go back to where this incredible journey began. October 2nd, 1982, Reno, Nevada. It was a Saturday afternoon, mild autumn weather, the kind of day when families ran errands and stocked up for the week ahead. The Silver State Supermarket on South Virginia Street was packed, shopping carts filling aisles, cashiers scanning items, children begging parents for candy at the checkout lanes. Among the shoppers was the Allerton family, Christine and David, along with their 2 daughters. Christine was 34, a night shift nurse at renowned regional medical center. She had just finished a grueling week of 12-hour shifts and desperately needed groceries. David was 36, a mechanic who owned a small auto repair shop on the east side of town, his hands permanently stained with grease no matter how hard he scrubbed. Their oldest daughter was Bailey, 9 years old, responsible and mature beyond her years, always helping her mother with household tasks. The youngest was Quincey, 6 years old, with wild curly red hair that refused to be tamed, bright green eyes full of mischief, and a personality that filled every room she entered. Quincey was talkative, energetic, constantly asking questions. She collected rocks and insisted on keeping every interesting pebble she found in her pockets. That afternoon she wore purple corduroy pants, a striped rainbow sweater Christine had knitted herself, and red sneakers with Velcro straps. She carried a small toy horse in her jacket pocket, a plastic palomino she had named Buttercup and took everywhere. The family arrived at the supermarket around 2 o'clock. David grabbed a shopping cart. Christine pulled out her carefully organized grocery list. Bailey walked beside her mother, helping spot items on the shelves. Quincey rode in the front seat of the cart, swinging her legs, humming a song she had learned at school. They moved through the produce section, Christine selecting apples and lettuce, David loading bags into the cart. Quincey asked if they could get grapes. Christine said yes. Bailey went to grab a bag. They continued through the aisles, cereal, bread, canned goods, the routine rhythm of weekend shopping. Around 2:30, they reached the frozen food section at the back of the store. Christine needed ice cream and frozen vegetables. David was comparing prices on 2 brands of peas. Christine was reading ingredient labels on ice cream containers. Bailey was looking at the frozen pizzas. Quincey was still in the cart, getting restless after 30 minutes of shopping. "Mom, can I walk? My legs are tired." Christine glanced at her. "We're almost done, baby, just a few more things." But Quincey was already climbing out of the cart, her 6-year-old energy impossible to contain. "Fine, but stay right here where I can see you, don't wander off." Quincey nodded, started looking at the glass doors of the frozen section, making faces at her reflection. Christine turned back to the ice cream, debating between vanilla and chocolate. David was still examining peas. Bailey was reading the back of a pizza box. It took maybe 2 minutes, maybe less. When Christine turned around to check on Quincey, she was gone. Christine's heart skipped. She looked down the aisle. Both directions, no purple pants, no rainbow sweater. "Quincey, where are you?" No answer. David looked up. "Where'd she go?" Christine's voice rose. "Quincey, this isn't funny. Come here right now." Bailey started looking too, checking nearby aisles behind displays. They searched the frozen food section, the dairy section, the bakery. No Quincey. Christine was running now, pushing the cart aside, calling her daughter's name, other shoppers stopping to stare. David went to the front of the store, checked the checkout lanes, asked cashiers if they had seen a little girl in purple pants. No one had. The store manager was called. He made an announcement over the loudspeaker. "Attention shoppers, we are looking for a missing child, 6 years old, red curly hair, purple pants, rainbow sweater. If you see her, please bring her to the customer service desk immediately." The store seemed to freeze. Parents grabbed their own children closer. Employees stopped stocking shelves and began searching. Christine was hysterical, checking every aisle, looking under clothing racks, calling Quincey's name until her voice was raw. Bailey was crying, holding her father's hand, terrified. Within 15 minutes, Reno police arrived. Officers began questioning the family, searching the store systematically. One employee remembered seeing a little girl with red hair near the back exit around 2:35, but she couldn't say for certain if the child was alone or with someone. The back exit led to a loading dock area and employee parking. Police searched there immediately. They found nothing except tire tracks, dozens of them. Impossible to determine which were relevant. Security cameras were checked. The footage was grainy, black and white, but it showed Quincey climbing out of the cart at 2:32. At 2:34, she walked toward the end of the frozen food aisle. At 2:36, she was gone. The cameras didn't cover every angle. There were blind spots. Whoever took her knew where to go to avoid being seen. By 4 o'clock, every police officer in Reno was searching. K-9 units were brought in. Quincey's photo was distributed to every business within 5 miles. By evening, her face was on the local news. A school photo from kindergarten, her wild red curls and bright smile. And Quincey Allerton was nowhere to be found. The first 72 hours were critical, and they yielded almost nothing. Police interviewed every person who had been at the Silver State supermarket that Saturday. Every shopper, every employee, every delivery driver who had been near the loading dock. The employee who thought she saw a red-haired girl near the back exit couldn't provide more details. Couldn't describe if anyone was with her. Couldn't remember anything else useful. The security footage was analyzed frame by investigators, but the blind spots made it impossible to see where Quincey went after she left the frozen food aisle. One witness, a stock clerk, reported seeing a woman in a blue jacket acting nervous near the back exit around 2:30, but he didn't get a good look at her face. Couldn't provide a useful description. Police searched for women in blue jackets, but it was October in Nevada. Half the population wore blue jackets. Quincey's photo appeared on milk cartons, on billboards and newspapers across Nevada and neighboring states. Tips flooded in. Someone claimed to have seen a girl with red hair at a gas station in Sparks. Another caller reported a child matching her description at a casino in Las Vegas. Police followed every lead, drove hundreds of miles, interviewed dozens of people. Every single tip led nowhere. By November, 1 month after Quincey disappeared, the case was losing momentum. The daily searches stopped, the media coverage faded, the volunteer efforts disbanded. Christine stopped working. She couldn't focus on patients when her own child was missing. She spent her days driving through Reno, looking at every red-haired child she passed, showing Quincey's photo to strangers. David kept his auto shop open because they needed the income, but his heart wasn't in it. He made mistakes, forgot appointments. His customers noticed he was broken. Bailey became quiet and withdrawn. She was only 9 but felt responsible. She had been right there in the store. She should have been watching her sister. She developed anxiety that would follow her into adulthood. Panic attacks in crowded places, fear of losing people she loved. By 1983, 1 year had passed. The Allertons held a memorial service at their church. Not a funeral because there was no body, just a gathering to remember Quincey. Christine couldn't stop crying. David stood rigid, his jaw clenched. Bailey sat between them, clutching Quincey's toy horse Buttercup, the one that had been left in the shopping cart. The case was officially classified as cold. A detective named Paul Henderson inherited the file. He promised the family he wouldn't give up, but Christine could see he thought Quincey was dead. By 1985, 3 years had passed. Christine went back to nursing, working night shifts again, finding solace in helping others because she couldn't help her own daughter. David threw himself into his work, expanding his auto shop, hiring 2 mechanics, staying busy so he didn't have time to think about what he had lost. Bailey struggled through middle school. Her grades dropped. She had trouble making friends. The other kids knew she was the girl whose sister disappeared. It defined her. Every October 2nd, the anniversary of Quincey's disappearance, Christine would bake chocolate chip cookies, Quincey's favorite, and set a place at the dinner table. She would put out Quincey's plate, her cup, her silverware, and they would eat dinner as a family of 4, even though only 3 were present. David participated in the ritual because Christine needed it, but it tore him apart every time. By 1990, 8 years had passed. Bailey graduated high school, left for college in California. She needed to escape Reno, the city where her sister vanished, the memories that suffocated her. Christine and David's marriage was strained. Grief had built a wall between them. They lived in the same house but felt like strangers. They went to counseling, tried to reconnect, but Quincey's absence was always there, an invisible presence at every meal, every conversation, every moment. By 1995, 13 years had passed. Christine was 47. David was 49. They had accepted that they would probably never know what happened to their youngest daughter. Quincey's room had been kept exactly as it was for 5 years before Christine finally packed everything into boxes. She couldn't throw the items away but couldn't look at them every day anymore. The boxes were stored in the garage, labeled in Christine's careful handwriting. Quincey's things opened only on anniversaries or when the grief became too heavy. By 2000, 18 years had passed. Bailey was 27. She had become a social worker specializing in missing children cases. It was her way of honoring Quincey, of trying to help other families find what her family never could. She had moved back to Nevada, not to Reno but to Las Vegas, close enough to visit her parents but far enough to have her own life. Christine retired from nursing in 2005 after 35 years, her body worn down by decades of night shifts and the emotional weight of loss. David sold his auto shop in 2008, his hands too arthritic to work on engines anymore. They moved to a smaller house, downsized their lives. By 2010, 28 years had passed. Christine was 62. David was 64. Bailey was 37 with 2 children of her own, a boy and a girl. She named her daughter Quinn, as close to Quincey as she could get without making it too obvious, a way of keeping her sister's memory alive. The grandchildren knew about their missing aunt. They looked at old photos, asked questions about the girl with the wild red curls. Bailey told them stories about how Quincey collected rocks, about how she named her toy horse Buttercup, about how she was full of energy and questions and life. By 2020, 38 years had passed. Christine was 72, David was 74, both dealing with health issues, both knowing they would probably die without knowing what happened to Quincey. Detective Henderson had retired years ago. The case was now handled by a younger detective who reviewed it occasionally, but had no new leads to pursue. Then in the summer of 2024, something extraordinary happened that would change everything. A woman named Laura Bennett, living in Denver, Colorado, decided to take a DNA test to learn about her ancestry and possibly find biological relatives. Laura was 48 years old, a landscape architect who designed public parks and gardens. She had been raised by a woman named Margaret Bennett, who she believed was her aunt. Margaret had told Laura that her parents died in a car accident when she was very young, that Margaret had adopted her and raised her as her own daughter. Laura had no reason to question this story, no memories of her early childhood. Margaret had been a loving mother, the only parent she had ever known. But Margaret had passed away in 2023, and while going through her belongings, Laura found a lockbox with documents that didn't quite make sense. A birth certificate with Laura's name but a different birth date, news clippings about missing children from the 1980s, photos of a red-haired little girl that looked eerily similar to Laura's own childhood photos. Confused and unsettled, Laura decided to take a DNA test, hoping it might provide answers about her origins. 8 weeks later, the results came back, and Laura's entire world shattered. Laura Bennett stared at her DNA results, her hands trembling. The ancestry breakdown was there, but what caught her attention was something else entirely. There was a close DNA match, someone who shared 25% of her genetic material. The relationship category said niece or aunt. The name was Bailey Whitmore. She lived in Las Vegas, Nevada. Laura had never heard of Bailey Whitmore, had no known relatives in Nevada. Margaret had always said their family was from Colorado, that everyone else was gone. Laura clicked on Bailey's profile. She had uploaded a family tree. At the top were names Christine Allerton and David Allerton. Below them were 2 children listed, Bailey and Quincey. Next to Quincey's name was a note that made Laura's blood run cold. Missing since October 1982, age 6, Reno, Nevada. There was a photo attached, a school picture of a little girl with wild red curly hair, bright green eyes, wearing a rainbow-striped sweater. Laura got up from her computer, walked to her bedroom, pulled out old photo albums Margaret had kept. She found photos of herself as a child. Same red curly hair, same green eyes, same face shape, wearing clothes that looked similar to the ones in the missing child photo. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the album. Laura looked at her birth certificate. The one Margaret had always shown her. It said Laura Bennett, born March 15, 1976. But if she was the missing girl Quincey Allerton, she would have been born in 1976 too. The age matched perfectly. Laura sat on her bed trying to process what this meant. Margaret had raised her, loved her, been the only mother she ever knew. But what if Margaret had taken her? What if everything she believed about her life was a lie? Laura called her partner, a woman named Andrea who she had been with for 8 years, her voice breaking as she tried to explain. Andrea came home immediately, held Laura as she sobbed, helped her think through what to do next. "You need to contact this Bailey person," Andrea said gently. "You need to find out the truth." That evening, Laura sent a message through the DNA website to Bailey Whitmore. "Hi Bailey, my name is Laura Bennett. I live in Denver. I recently took a DNA test and it shows we're closely related. I found a family tree that mentions someone named Quincey who went missing in 1982. I don't know how to say this, but I think there might be a connection. Can we talk?" She hit send, then sat staring at the screen, her entire identity hanging in the balance. 2 days later, Bailey responded. Her message was brief but emotional. "Laura, I've been waiting 43 years for this message. Please call me as soon as you can." And she included her phone number. Laura dialed with shaking hands. Bailey answered on the first ring. "Laura?" "Yes, this is Laura." Bailey's voice cracked. "I think you might be my sister Quincey. I think someone took you from a grocery store when you were 6 years old." Laura felt the room spin. "That's impossible. I was raised by my Aunt Margaret. My parents died in a car accident. I've lived in Colorado my whole life." Bailey's voice was gentle but urgent. "Can you tell me about your earliest memories? Do you remember anything from before you lived with Margaret?" Laura thought hard. Tried to reach back into her childhood. There were fragments, vague impressions, nothing concrete. "I remember living in an apartment. I remember Margaret telling me we had to move, that we were starting over, but I was very young, maybe 5 or 6. Bailey asked another question. "Do you have any birthmarks, anything distinctive?" Laura hesitated. "Yes, I have a small birthmark on my right shoulder blade shaped like a crescent moon." Bailey let out a sound like a gasp. Quincey had that exact birthmark. Mom used to call it her little moon. Laura felt tears streaming down her face. This couldn't be real, but the DNA didn't lie, the photos didn't lie. "What do we do now?" Laura whispered. Bailey's voice was steady. "We contact the police, we get official DNA testing done, we find out the truth, and Laura, I want you to know that whatever happens, you're not alone in this." Within a week, Nevada authorities were involved. Detective Marcus Webb from the Reno PD Cold Case Unit was assigned. He arranged for Laura to provide a DNA sample that would be compared against evidence from Quincey Allerton's disappearance, a hairbrush that had been kept in storage for 43 years. Laura flew to Reno, met Bailey in person for the first time. When Bailey opened the door and saw her, she burst into tears. "You look exactly like Mom did at your age. You have her eyes, her smile, everything." Laura looked at photos of Christine and David, studied their faces, tried to see herself in them. Bailey showed her pictures of the grocery store, of the old house on Elm Street where they used to live, of Quincey's room before it was packed away. She told Laura about the day she disappeared, about the decades of searching, about how their mother never stopped hoping. Laura listened, feeling like she was hearing about someone else's life, not her own. She had no memory of any of this. The DNA results came back 3 weeks later. They were definitive. Laura Bennett was Quincey Allerton. The match to the hairbrush was 99.9%, there was no doubt. Detective Webb began investigating Margaret Bennett's background. What he found was disturbing, but also sad. Margaret Bennett's real name was Margaret Holloway. She had been a grocery store cashier in Reno in the early 1980s. She worked at Silver State Supermarket. In 1981, Margaret had a daughter who died at 18 months old from sudden infant death syndrome. The loss devastated her. She was hospitalized for severe depression. When she was released in early 1982, she returned to work at the supermarket. But colleagues noticed she was different, obsessed with children, particularly little girls with red hair like her daughter had. Detective Webb theorized that on October 2, 1982, Margaret saw Quincey in the store, saw a little girl who reminded her of the daughter she had lost, and something in her mind snapped. She waited until Quincey wandered away from her family, took her hand, told her she knew where her mommy was, led her out the back exit to her car. She drove to Colorado where no one knew her, created a false identity for Quincey, forged documents, and raised her as Laura, the daughter she believed she deserved to have. Laura felt sick. The woman who had tucked her in at night, who had helped her with homework, who had been at every school play and graduation, had kidnapped her. But she also felt conflicted, because Margaret had loved her, had been a good mother in every way except the most fundamental one. Bailey held her hand. "I can't imagine what you're feeling, but you need to know that our parents never stopped looking for you. Mom and Dad loved you every single day." Laura asked the question she was afraid to hear answered. "Are they still alive? Can I meet them?" Bailey's face fell. "Dad is He's 76, living in a care facility, but Mom, she passed away 2 years ago. She never knew you were found." Laura broke down. She would never get to meet the woman who had given birth to her, who had searched for her for decades, who had died without knowing she was alive. But she could meet her father, and maybe that would be enough. 2 weeks after the DNA confirmation, Bailey arranged for Laura to meet their father David at the assisted living facility in Sparks, where he now lived. Laura was terrified. She had no memory of this man, no connection to him beyond genetics, but he was her father, her biological father who had spent 43 years mourning her. Bailey drove them both to the facility, held Laura's hand in the parking lot before they went in. "He's not the same man he was when you were 6, Bailey said gently. "He's older, he's been through so much, but he never stopped loving you." They walked through the lobby, down a hallway that smelled of cleaning products and cafeteria food, to room 217. Bailey knocked softly. A voice from inside said, "Come in." David was sitting in a recliner by the window, watching birds at a feeder outside. He turned when they entered. When he saw Laura, he went completely still, his weathered face frozen in disbelief. Bailey spoke first. "Dad, this is Laura. She paused. "She's Quincy." David's eyes filled with tears. He tried to stand, but his arthritic knees wouldn't cooperate. Laura walked to him instead. She knelt beside his chair, looked into eyes that were the same green as her own. "Hi," she said softly, not knowing what else to say. David reached out with a shaking hand, touched her red curls, the same wild texture they had always been. "You have your mother's hair," he whispered. She could never tame it either. Laura felt tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry I don't remember you. I'm so sorry." David shook his head. "It's not your fault, baby girl. None of this was ever your fault." They sat together for hours, Bailey showing David photos of Laura's life, her childhood, her career, her partner, Andrea. David looked at each picture with wonder, absorbed every detail, decades of loss being filled in with glimpses of the daughter he thought he had lost forever. Laura told him about Margaret, about the life she had lived in Colorado, about becoming a landscape architect, about designing gardens and parks. David listened, his expression complicated. "That woman stole you from us," he said quietly. "But she also kept you safe, kept you alive. I don't know how to feel about that." Laura understood completely. She didn't know how to feel about it either. Over the next few weeks, Laura spent time with David regularly, bringing Andrea to meet him, sharing meals, building a relationship from nothing. David told her stories about Christine, about how she had been a fierce mother, a dedicated nurse, how she had never given up hope. He showed Laura photos from before the abduction, pictures of Quincy as a baby, as a toddler, the family of 4 that had been torn apart. Laura stared at the photos, trying to find memory, trying to feel connection, but there was nothing. Just images of strangers who happened to share her DNA. Bailey helped bridge the gap. She told stories that brought the photos to life, reminded Laura that even if she didn't remember, she had been deeply loved. The media caught wind of the story. Girl missing 43 years found alive through DNA test. It became national news. Reporters wanted interviews, producers wanted to make documentaries, everyone wanted a piece of the miracle reunion. Laura declined most requests. She needed time to process, needed privacy to figure out who she was now, that her entire identity had been upended. Bailey became Laura's advocate, screening calls, protecting her sister from the overwhelming attention. Laura struggled with her identity. She had been Laura Bennett for 48 years. That was the only life she knew, the only name that felt like hers. But she was also Quincey Allerton, a stolen child, a missing person, a cold case finally solved. Her therapist helped her understand that she could be both, that identity isn't erased by truth, it's expanded by it. Andrea supported her through everything, held her when she cried, celebrated small victories, never wavered in her commitment. Laura decided to keep the name Laura professionally, but started using Quincy with family, a compromise that honored both her past and her present. She met extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins who remembered the little red-haired girl who disappeared. They welcomed her with open arms, grateful for the miracle. Bailey's children, Laura's niece and nephew, were fascinated by the aunt who had been missing their entire lives. They asked endless questions, wanted to know everything. Quinn, Bailey's daughter who had been named in Quincy's honor, formed an especially close bond with Laura. They had long conversations about identity, about family, about what it means to belong. David's health began to improve after Laura came back into his life. His doctor said it was remarkable, that having purpose and joy can heal the body in unexpected ways. He told Laura every time he saw her that he wished Christine could have lived to see this, that she would have been so happy, So proud of the woman Laura had become. Laura wished she could have met Christine too. She visited her mother's grave, brought flowers, talked to a woman she had never known, but who had loved her unconditionally. "I'm sorry I couldn't come home sooner," Laura whispered to the headstone. "I didn't know I was lost." The case against Margaret Bennett was complicated by the fact that she was dead. There would be no trial, no justice in the traditional sense. But investigators pieced together what had happened, how Margaret had taken Quincey, how she had created false documents, how she had moved to Colorado and built a new life. They found evidence that Margaret had struggled with the guilt, had almost turned herself in multiple times over the years, but fear always stopped her. Laura read the investigation reports, trying to understand the woman who had raised her, trying to reconcile the loving mother with the kidnapper. It was impossible to hate someone who had been kind, who had sacrificed to give her opportunities, who had loved her genuinely even if the foundation was built on a terrible crime. Bailey understood. She had her own complicated feelings. Grateful that Margaret had kept Quincey safe, but furious that she had stolen 4 decades from their family. They talked through their feelings together. Two sisters rebuilding a relationship that had been severed before it really began. Laura started spending weekends in Nevada, dividing her time between Denver and her rediscovered family. She brought her landscape architecture skills to a project in Reno, designing a memorial garden for families of missing children, a place of hope and remembrance. At the center, she placed a sculpture of a little girl with wild curly hair, holding a toy horse. The plaque read, "For Quincey and all children who find their way home." David attended the dedication ceremony in his wheelchair. Bailey beside him, Laura's partner Andrea taking photos. "This is beautiful," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would have loved this." Laura knelt beside his wheelchair. "I wish I could have known her." David smiled through tears. "She knew you, baby girl. Every day of your life. She knew you and she loved you." It has been over a year since Laura Bennett discovered she was Quincey Allerton. Over a year since a DNA test unraveled 43 years of lies and reunited a family torn apart by tragedy. The journey hasn't been easy. Identity is complex when you've lived nearly 5 decades as someone you're not, when the foundation of your life turns out to be built on kidnapping. Laura still goes by Laura professionally. It's the name her clients know, the name on her business cards and architectural designs. But with family, she's Quincey. She's reclaimed the name her birth parents gave her, uses it as a bridge between who she was and who she became. She splits her time now between Denver and Nevada, maintaining her landscape architecture practice while building relationships with the family she never knew she had. David is 77 now, his health fragile but stable. Every day with his daughter is a gift he never thought he would receive. They have lunch together twice a week. Laura brings him photo albums of her life, fills in the 43 years he missed. He listens to every story with wonder. Bailey and Laura have become incredibly close. They talk on the phone almost daily. Text constantly, make up for the decades they lost. Bailey says it's surreal having a sister again after spending most of her life as an only child. But it's also healing. Closure she didn't know she needed. Laura's partner, Andrea, has been embraced by the Allerton family. David calls her his daughter-in-law. Bailey's kids call her Aunt Andrea. The family has grown, expanded, made room for all the complicated feelings and new relationships. Laura still struggles with grief over Christine, the mother she never got to meet. She visits her grave regularly, brings flowers, tells her about her life. Bailey says their mother would have been overjoyed, that she would have loved Laura's gardens, her kindness, her strength. "I wish I could remember her," Laura says often. "I wish I had just one memory." Bailey always responds the same way. "You were her baby. She held you. She loved you. That's in your DNA, even if it's not in your memory." The case received massive media attention. It became a symbol of hope for families of missing children, proof that even after decades, reunions are possible. Laura was hesitant about the publicity at first, but she realized her story could help others, could encourage families to never give up, could promote DNA testing as a tool for solving cold cases. She's done several interviews, always emphasizing that she doesn't remember being taken, that Margaret was a loving mother despite the terrible thing she did. It's a nuanced story, not black and white, and Laura refuses to simplify it just to make people comfortable. The Nevada legislature passed a bill inspired by Quincey's case, requiring all missing children cases to have DNA profiles entered into genealogy databases. The law also provides funding for families to access DNA testing services, removing financial barriers that might prevent cases from being solved. It's called the Quincey Allerton Act, ensuring her story helps others find their way home. Laura attended the bill signing ceremony, stood beside the governor, her red curls now streaked with gray but still wild and untamable. If my story can help even one family find answers, then maybe all this pain has meaning, she said to the gathered crowd. David was there too in his wheelchair, crying tears of pride. Laura has used her landscape architecture skills to design memorial gardens in 3 Nevada cities, spaces dedicated to missing children and the families who search for them. Each garden has a bench with the inscription, "Hope never expires, DNA remembers," a reminder that it's never too late. Bailey works with missing children organizations, using her social work background to support families going through what hers went through. She says helping others is how she honors her mother's memory, how she continues Christine's legacy of never giving up. Laura and Bailey are planning a trip together next year. They want to visit the old house on Elm Street, the grocery store where Quincey disappeared, retrace the steps of that terrible day. Not to relive the trauma, but to reclaim it, to acknowledge what was lost and celebrate what was found. David probably won't be able to make the trip, his health is declining, but he's made peace with that. "I got to see my daughter again," he tells anyone who will listen. "I got to know her as an adult. I got more than I ever dreamed possible." Laura knows her time with David is limited. She cherishes every conversation, every meal, every moment. When he passes, she'll grieve, but she'll also be grateful for the year they had, for the relationship they built from nothing. DNA doesn't forget, even when memory does, even when 43 years pass and lives are completely rebuilt. Even when the truth seems impossible, DNA remembers. And because of that, families can be reunited, stolen children can find their way home, identities can be reclaimed, and love can survive across decades of separation. Quincey Allerton's story is a reminder that it's never too late, that hope should never be abandoned, that technology can work miracles, and that family is worth searching for no matter how much time has passed. If this story moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us continue bringing extraordinary stories like Quincey's to light. Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, tell us how this case impacted you. We read every single one and cherish this community. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the DNA Archives. We're committed to bringing you more incredible cold cases, more mysteries solved through DNA, more stories of hope, reunion, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing in the power of truth, and remember, sometimes the greatest mysteries have the most beautiful solutions. We'll see you in the next case.